Across thousands of years, kings rose, empires fell, and miracles changed the course of history. These are the stories that shaped the Bible. What would make a king bow to gods he just defeated? This is Amaziah, a young king who did everything right. He forgave his father's killers. He obeyed a prophet, even when it cost him a fortune. He won a huge battle against Edom. Then pride crept in. He worshipped the very statues that failed to save his enemies. He threatened the prophet who warned him. He challenged a stronger king out of ego and lost everything. His walls broken, his treasures stolen. His own people hunted him down. This story is for those who are going through battles and for those who don't have faith in themselves. Darkness had slowly spread across the kingdom of Judah. Its king was a man named Joash, and by the end of his reign, many people wanted him dead. Joash had once followed God, but he later allowed idol worship to spread through Judah. When a priest named Zechariah warned him to stop, Joash ordered the people to kill the priest with stones. Not long after that, an enemy army attacked Judah, killed many of its leaders, and left Joash badly wounded. His servants carried him into the palace and placed him on a bed, where he could no longer protect himself. Two of those servants were angry because Joash had ordered Zechariah's death, so they entered the room and killed their own king. When Joash died, his 25-year-old son became the new king, and his name was Amaziah. The Bible says he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, but not with his whole heart. At first, however, Amaziah appeared to be a careful and obedient king. The crown now belonged to Amaziah, but so did every problem his father had left behind. Judah's army had just been defeated. Many important leaders were dead. The people were divided, and the two men who had killed Joash were still alive. Amaziah could not punish the murderers immediately, because his control over Judah was not yet secure. He waited until the kingdom was firmly under his control, then ordered the two men to be arrested and executed. But he did not touch their children. Kings often killed the children of their enemies to prevent them from taking revenge when they grew older. Amaziah refused to do that, because God's law said children must not die for their parents' crimes. Once the kingdom felt safe, he began looking toward Edom, an enemy nation that had once been under Judah's control, before breaking free during the reign of an earlier king. Judah had never taken that land back, and Amaziah saw a chance to do what the kings before him had failed to do. If he defeated Edom, he would not only make Judah stronger, but he would also prove to every soldier and leader that their new king could win a war. Amaziah called Judah's fighting men together and ordered his officers to count every man who was at least 20 years old and knew how to fight with a spear and shield. The soldiers were counted and organized under commanders of hundreds and thousands. When the counting ended, Amaziah had 300,000 trained soldiers ready to fight, but when he looked at that army, he decided that he still wanted more. The nearby kingdom of Israel had experienced warriors who could be hired for silver, so Amaziah paid 100 talents of silver for 100,000 extra soldiers. The hired soldiers entered Amaziah's camp, ready to fight Edom. Then, before the army could leave, a man of God came to Amaziah with a warning that threatened the king's entire plan. "Do not take the soldiers from Israel with you," the man said, "because the Lord is not with them." Amaziah had already paid them, and sending them home would cost him 1/4 of his army without returning any of his silver. Amaziah asked the question that was already troubling him. "But what about the 100 talents of silver I paid them?" The man of God answered, "The Lord can give you much more than that." Amaziah finally chose to listen, so he ordered the hired soldiers to gather their weapons and return home. The hired soldiers were furious that Amaziah had dismissed them. They returned home, burning with anger, and along the way they attacked towns belonging to Judah, killed 3,000 people and carried away a large amount of property. His choice to dismiss the soldiers had been right, but his earlier choice to hire them had already created a danger that he could no longer control. Amaziah led his 300,000 soldiers into the Valley of Salt, where Judah's army met the forces of Edom. Amaziah gave the order to attack, and Judah defeated Edom in the Valley of Salt, killing 10,000 Edomite soldiers. The battle could have ended there, but Amaziah's soldiers had captured another 10,000 Edomites alive. Amaziah's men took the 10,000 prisoners to the top of a high rock and threw them down, killing every one of them. Edom was defeated, its army was broken, and Amaziah had gained the victory he wanted. He could now return to Judah as the king who had succeeded where others had failed. But the victory placed a new danger inside him. Amaziah had obeyed the man of God before the battle, but after winning, he began to act as if the victory proved that every choice he made would succeed. Amaziah brought Edom's gods back to Judah, bowed before them, and offered sacrifices to them. God then sent a prophet who asked, "Why do you worship gods that could not even save their own people from you?" Instead of admitting that the prophet was right, Amaziah became angry.
These videos takes hours and hours to make. Please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from. Also, do you want to support the channel? A super thanks helps us create more Bible stories.
Amaziah cut the man off and asked, "Did we make you one of the king's advisors?" Then he gave him a threat. "Stop speaking, or you will be killed." The king, who had once listened to a man of God and sent 100,000 soldiers home, was now threatening to kill another man of God for questioning him. The prophet stopped speaking, but before he left, he gave Amaziah one final warning. "I know that God has decided to destroy you because you have done this and refused to listen." Amaziah refused to change. Proud of his victory over Edom, he sent a challenge to Jehoash, the king of Israel. Some Bible translations also call this king Joash, but he was not Amaziah's murdered father. He was the ruler of Israel. Amaziah's message was short: "Come and meet me face to face." The meaning was clear, because Amaziah was inviting Jehoash to bring his army out and settle the matter through war. Amaziah had won one battle and now wanted another. But the prophet had already told him that God had decided to destroy him. Jehoash did not send soldiers immediately, because he first sent Amaziah a warning in the form of a simple story. He said that a small thorn bush in Lebanon once sent a message to a great cedar tree and asked the cedar to give its daughter to the thorn bush's son in marriage. Before the cedar even needed to answer, a wild animal walked past and crushed the thorn bush under its feet. Amaziah was the thorn bush, and Jehoash was warning that Israel could crush him easily. Jehoash then spoke directly. "You defeated Edom, and now you are proud. Stay home and enjoy your victory. Why ask for trouble and cause both you and Judah to fall?" Amaziah had been given another chance to stop, because no battle had started, no armies had met, and no soldiers had died. He only needed to cancel his challenge and remain in Judah, but his victory over Edom had made him believe that Jehoash was afraid. Amaziah remembered how Edom's army had broken before him, but he ignored the most important difference between that battle and the one he now wanted. He had defeated Edom after listening to God, but he was about to fight Israel. Amaziah refused to listen, and the Bible explains that God allowed him to continue because the king had chosen the gods of Edom and would now be handed over to his enemies. Amaziah ignored the warning and led Judah's army against Israel. This time, however, God had not promised him victory. Jehoash brought Israel's army into Judah, and the two forces met at Beth Shemesh. Amaziah gave the order to move forward, and the battle began. The battle turned against Judah almost immediately. Israel broke through Amaziah's lines, and fear spread through his army. His soldiers fled toward their homes, leaving Amaziah behind to be captured. Jehoash and Amaziah finally met face to face, just as Amaziah had requested, but Amaziah now stood before him as a prisoner. Jehoash could have killed him on the battlefield, but he chose a punishment that would shame Amaziah in front of his entire kingdom. He forced the captured king to march back to Jerusalem while Israel's army surrounded him. The people watching from the city could see Amaziah returning, but Judah's soldiers were not marching beside him. Jehoash brought Amaziah to the city wall and ordered his men to tear down a large part of it. Israel's soldiers broke through 400 cubits of the wall, stretching from the Ephraim gate to the corner gate, while Amaziah watched and could do nothing to stop them. Jerusalem was now left exposed because its king had refused to listen. Jehoash then entered the temple and took the gold, silver, and valuable objects kept there. His soldiers also entered Amaziah's palace and removed the treasure from the royal storehouses. Jehoash also took hostages before returning to Israel, leaving Amaziah in the city he had failed to protect. The king was still alive and still wore the title of king, but everyone could see the result of his pride. The army had run, the wall had fallen, the temple had been robbed, the palace treasure was gone, and people from Jerusalem had been taken away. Amaziah had been warned before any of this happened, but he had refused to listen because he believed one victory meant he could not lose. Amaziah continued living as king, but a plan to kill him began forming inside Judah. The Bible does not give the names of the men who started the plan or explain every reason they had, but it says that the conspiracy began from the time Amaziah turned away from God. Amaziah had once waited for the right time to punish the men who killed his father. Now, other men were waiting for the right time to kill him. When Amaziah learned about the conspiracy, he fled from Jerusalem to Lachish. The conspirators discovered where he had gone and sent men after him. They found Amaziah in Lachish and killed him. Amaziah was then buried beside the kings who had ruled before him. What could make a king so cursed? The dogs would lick his blood when he died. Ahab was a king with more gold than he could count, and a palace no one could touch. But his wife, Jezebel, wanted more. You'll watch a king cry like a child over a garden he could not have. You'll watch Ahab's wife frame an innocent man for murder. You'll watch dogs lick the king's own blood the second he died. If you are struggling to control your desires, then this story is for you. Samaria was the capital of the kingdom of Israel, and Ahab had just become its king. 6 kings had ruled Israel before Ahab, and every one of them had led the nation further away from God. Ahab was about to become the worst of them all. Ahab's father, King Omri, had built Samaria into a strong and wealthy city. When Omri died, Ahab took the throne, and he wanted to make his kingdom even more powerful. To do that, he married a foreign princess named Jezebel. She came from Sidon, a wealthy city to the north, and her father worshipped a false god named Baal. This marriage was not just about love. It was a political deal meant to bring Israel and Sidon closer together. But Jezebel did not come to Israel quietly. She brought her god with her. Ahab built a temple for Baal right inside Samaria, and inside that temple, he set up an altar where the people could worship this false god. Word of this reached a prophet named Elijah. Elijah walked straight into Ahab's presence and gave him a warning nobody expected. As the Lord lives, there will be no dew or rain in these years, except at my word. With that one sentence, Elijah was telling Ahab that the God he had rejected was about to punish the entire land with famine, and only Elijah would know when it would end. Then Elijah disappeared. God told him to hide near a brook called Kerith, and while he was there, ravens brought him bread and meat every morning and evening. When the brook eventually dried up from the drought, God sent him to a widow in a town called Zarephath, and there Elijah stayed while the famine spread across the entire kingdom. Back in Samaria, the drought was destroying everything. Crops failed. Animals began to starve. Ahab grew desperate to find any patch of grass left in the land, because if the last of his horses and mules died, his kingdom would lose its entire army. So Ahab called for his palace manager, a man named Obadiah, and split the land between them, each man taking one direction to search for any water or grass still left. For more than 3 years, Ahab watched his kingdom collapse beneath the drought, yet he still did not remove the temple of Baal or lead Israel back to God. Instead, he searched everywhere for Elijah, the man who had announced that the rain would stop. Obadiah was secretly loyal to God, even while working for Ahab. While walking his assigned route, Obadiah ran straight into Elijah, the very prophet Jezebel had been hunting to kill. Elijah gave him a direct order. "Go, tell your master, behold, Elijah is here." Obadiah was terrified, worried Ahab would kill him if Elijah vanished again before Ahab could arrive. But Elijah promised he would stay, and Obadiah went to deliver the message. When Ahab finally faced Elijah in person, he did not greet him as a prophet. He accused him instead. "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" Elijah answered without backing down. "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals." Then Elijah issued a challenge that would decide once and for all which God was real. He told Ahab to gather all of Israel, along with 450 prophets of Baal, at Mount Carmel, a tall mountain that could be seen from a wide stretch of land. Ahab followed Elijah's command and sent messengers throughout the kingdom to summon the people there. On Mount Carmel, Elijah stood alone in front of the crowd and Baal's prophets. He proposed a test. 2 altars would be built, one for Baal and one for the true God. Each side would place a bull on their altar, and whichever God answered by sending down fire, that God would be the real one. The prophets of Baal went first. They cried out, danced around their altar, and even cut themselves for hours, but nothing happened. No fire came. Then Elijah built his altar, and to make the test harder, ordered the people nearby to pour water over the sacrifice 3 times. He prayed a simple prayer, and fire fell instantly from the sky.
Before we continue, these videos takes hours and hours to make. Please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
Burning up the offering, the wood, the stones, and even the water surrounding it. The crowd fell to the ground and shouted, "The Lord! He is God!" The prophets of Baal were seized and killed at the valley below the mountain that same day. With Baal's prophets destroyed, Elijah told Ahab that rain was finally coming. Ahab went to eat and drink, while Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel and prayed for rain 7 times before a small cloud finally appeared over the sea. Within moments, the sky turned dark and heavy rain poured down, ending the drought that had crushed the kingdom for over 3 years. Ahab had now watched fire fall from heaven and rain return at Elijah's word. He had been given undeniable proof of who the true God was. This should have been the turning point where Ahab finally chose to follow God. Instead, Ahab went home and told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including the killing of her prophets. Jezebel responded with a threat sent directly to Elijah. She swore she would kill him within a day. just as he had killed her prophets. Elijah, terrified, fled from Samaria into the wilderness alone. While Elijah was running for his life, a new threat was rising against Ahab from a completely different direction. A king named Ben-Hadad ruled over Aram, a powerful kingdom to the northeast, and he marched his army straight to Samaria's gates with 32 allied kings behind him. Ben-Hadad sent a message into the city demanding Ahab hand over his silver, his gold, and even his wives and children. Ahab, trying to avoid war, agreed to the terms. But Ben-Hadad pushed further, demanding his men be allowed to search the entire palace and take anything else they wanted. This second demand was too much even for Ahab, and he refused. Ben-Hadad responded with a boast, sending word that his army was so massive it could turn Samaria to dust, with nothing but the handfuls of dirt his soldiers carried. A prophet arrived at the palace and delivered a message that surprised Ahab completely. God intended to hand Ben-Hadad's massive army over to Israel that very day, not because Ahab deserved it, but so the whole nation would understand that the Lord was still God over Israel. Following the prophet's exact instructions, Ahab sent out a small group of young officers first, and Israel's forces routed the Aramean army completely. Ben-Hadad's advisors believed they had lost because Israel's God was a God of the hills. So the following year they planned to attack again on flat ground at a city called Aphek, believing that terrain would guarantee their victory. Once again, a prophet came to Ahab beforehand and told him Israel would win this second battle too, so that Ahab would know the Lord ruled everywhere, not just the mountains. Israel struck again, killing 100,000 Aramean soldiers in a single day. The survivors fled into Aphek, but a city wall collapsed upon 27,000 of them. Ben-Hadad escaped the destruction and hid inside an inner room. Ben-Hadad's remaining officers advised him to approach Ahab as beggars, wearing sackcloth with ropes around their heads, a sign of total surrender. When they came before Ahab pleading for Ben-Hadad's life, Ahab made a decision that would later cost him everything. He called Ben-Hadad my brother, brought him up into his own chariot, and made a peace treaty with him. Ahab released a king whom God had appointed for destruction, choosing his own political agreement over God's judgment. A prophet came to Ahab and told him a made-up story. He said, "Another soldier told me to guard a prisoner, but I let him escape. Now I must die because I failed." Ahab replied, "Yes, that's fair. You deserve the punishment." Then the prophet said, "That story is really about you. God told you to kill Ben-Hadad, but you let him go. So now you will die instead, and your people will suffer because of your decision." Ahab went back to his palace angry and upset, refusing to accept God's warning, refusing to accept what he had just been told. Not long after, Ahab's attention turned to something much smaller than kingdoms and armies. Near the palace in the city of Jezreel stood a vineyard belonging to a man named Naboth. Ahab wanted the vineyard for himself, to turn it into a vegetable garden next to his palace, and he offered Naboth a fair trade or a fair price for it. Naboth refused, explaining that the land had belonged to his family for generations, and under Israel's law, he was forbidden from selling his inheritance permanently. Ahab took this rejection extremely hard. He returned to the palace, lay down on his bed, turned his face away, and refused to eat, sulking like a child over a piece of land he could not have. Jezebel found him this way and asked what was wrong. When Ahab explained, Jezebel mocked him for being so weak. "Do you now govern Israel? Arise, eat bread, and let your heart be cheerful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth." Jezebel then wrote letters in Ahab's name, sealed them with his royal seal, and sent them to the elders of Naboth's own city. The letters ordered the elders to proclaim a fast, seat Naboth in a place of honor, and bring in two worthless men to falsely accuse him of cursing God and the king. The elders obeyed exactly as instructed. Naboth was dragged outside the city and stoned to death based entirely on lies invented to steal his land. When Jezebel heard Naboth was dead, she told Ahab to go take possession of the vineyard. Since Naboth no longer owned it, Ahab went down to the vineyard immediately to claim it as his own. Waiting for him there, however, was Elijah, sent by God to confront him at the very place the murder had made possible. Elijah's words to Ahab were devastating. "Have you killed and also taken possession?" Then Elijah pronounced judgment directly. In the same place, dogs had licked up Naboth's blood. Dogs would also lick up Ahab's own blood, and his entire family line would be wiped out because of the evil he had done. Elijah added a final judgment aimed at Jezebel specifically, declaring that dogs would eat her body within the walls of Jezreel. For once in his life, Ahab responded with genuine humility. He tore his clothes, put on rough sackcloth, fasted, and walked around subdued instead of proud. God noticed this humility and sent Elijah back with a modified message. Because Ahab had humbled himself, the disaster planned for his family would not happen during his own lifetime, but would instead fall upon his son's generation. 3 years passed with peace between Israel and Aram, but Ahab still had unfinished business. A city called Ramoth-Gilead was supposed to have been returned to Israel as part of the earlier treaty with Ben-Hadad, and it never was. Ahab decided the time had come to take it back by force, and he asked Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah to the south, to join him in battle. Jehoshaphat agreed, but asked Ahab to first seek advice from a prophet of the Lord before marching to war. Ahab summoned around 400 prophets, and every single one of them told him to attack, promising certain victory. Jehoshaphat, unconvinced, asked if there was any other prophet of the Lord they could ask. Ahab admitted there was one more, a man named Micaiah, but confessed he hated him, for he never prophesies good concerning me, but evil. He first repeated the same message as the other prophets, promising victory. But Ahab, sensing something was wrong, demanded the truth. Micaiah then described a vision where all of Israel was scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd, meaning Ahab would die in the coming battle and leave his army leaderless. Furious, Ahab imprisoned Micaiah, but ignored the warning and marched toward Ramoth-Gilead with Jehoshaphat. To escape the prophecy, Ahab disguised himself as an ordinary soldier, while Jehoshaphat entered battle wearing his royal robes. An Aramean archer randomly released an arrow, and it struck Ahab between the joints of his armor. Wounded, Ahab remained standing in his chariot throughout the battle until the sun went down and he died. After the battle, Ahab's blood collected in the bottom of his chariot as his army returned home. When servants washed the chariot at the pool in Samaria, dogs licked up Ahab's blood. God's judgment spoken through Elijah was completely fulfilled, proving that every word the Lord had spoken came true. One impossible task, and God himself would come down. God wanted to live among his people. But first, one man had to build a place where God could live. Every detail had to be perfect, and every measurement mattered. One mistake could ruin everything. But who was the man trusted with building a place for God, and what would happen if he messed up? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning of Bezalel's story. Israel had just escaped from Egypt. For generations, they had lived under the rule of Pharaoh. They had been beaten, controlled, and forced to build cities for a king who did not care about them. But God had heard their cries. He sent Moses, opened the sea before them, and led them out of slavery. Now they were free, but freedom did not mean their journey was over. They were walking through a dangerous desert toward the land God had promised them. They lived in tents and moved whenever God told them to move.
We are with you.
Then God told Moses something incredible. He wanted to live among his people. God did not ask them to build a stone temple or a great palace. They were still traveling, so his house would travel with them. It would be a large and beautiful tent called the tabernacle. It would stand in the center of Israel's camp, showing everyone that God was not far away. He was with them, but this would not be an ordinary tent. Every measurement mattered. Every part had a purpose. It needed gold, silver, strong wood, fine cloth, and precious stones. It had to be beautiful, yet strong enough to be taken apart, carried and built again wherever Israel stopped. There was just one problem. Who could build it? The Israelites knew how to make bricks for Egypt. They knew how to carry heavy loads and work under cruel masters. But this project needed something different. It needed people who could shape gold, carve wood, cut stones, weave cloth, and follow exact instructions without changing them. God already knew the man he would choose, and his name was Bezalel. Bezalel came from the tribe of Judah. He was the son of Uri and the grandson of Hur. He was not a king, priest, soldier, or prophet. He was a craftsman. He worked with his hands. That may have seemed like an ordinary job, but God was about to show Israel that ordinary work could become holy when it was placed in his hands. Moses came down from Mount Sinai with instructions from God. These were not loose ideas that Bezalel could change. God had given exact plans for the tabernacle and everything inside it. Then God told Moses the name of the man who would lead the work. God said, "I have chosen Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, from the tribe of Judah. I have filled him with the Spirit of God, giving him wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and skill in every kind of craft." God gave Bezalel the ability to design beautiful work in gold, silver, and bronze. He gave him skill to cut stones, carve wood, and complete every kind of work the tabernacle required. This was different from anything Israel had seen before. The Bible does not tell us how much experience Bezalel already had, but it makes one thing clear. His greatest ability came from God. Bezalel is the first person in the Bible specifically described as being filled with the Spirit of God for a task like this. But Bezalel would not work alone. God chose another man named Oholiab from the tribe of Dan to work beside him. Oholiab was skilled in carving, designing, and sewing beautiful patterns into cloth. Both men were needed, and God called both by name. God also gave them the ability to teach. Two men could never finish the tabernacle alone. Curtains had to be woven, boards cut, gold shaped, and stones prepared. Hundreds of pieces had to fit together. So Bezalel and Oholiab would not simply do the work. They would train other willing workers until the whole camp was filled with people who knew how to help. Moses gathered Israel together and told them what God had commanded. He announced that Bezalel and Oholiab had been chosen to lead the work. Then he asked everyone with skill and a willing heart to join them. But workers were only part of the problem. They still needed materials. There were no markets in the desert where Moses could buy gold or fine cloth. There were no forests nearby filled with perfect wood. Everything needed for the tabernacle had to come from the people themselves. So Moses asked Israel to give. He did not force them. Anyone with a willing heart could bring gold, silver, fine cloth, animal skins, or wood. At first, perhaps no one knew if there would be enough. Then the people began to come. Families stepped out of their tents, carrying what they could give. Some brought gold earrings and bracelets, perhaps the same treasures the Egyptians had given them. Others brought silver, cloth, skins, or wood. No single person could supply everything, but each person brought a part. The gifts kept arriving the next morning. Then they came again the morning after that. Soon, Piles of material stood near the workers. Bezalel and his team finally had what they needed. Yet the people continued bringing more. Before long, the workers noticed a new problem. There was too much. They left their work, found Moses and told him, "The people are bringing more than enough to complete what the Lord commanded."
Before we continue, these videos takes hours and hours to make. Please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
Moses had to send a message through the entire camp, telling the people to stop giving. The people who had once been slaves now gave so freely that they had to be held back. With the materials gathered and the workers ready, Bezalel began. The plans from Mount Sinai were no longer just words. Every line now had to become something real. One of Bezalel's greatest tasks was the Ark of the Covenant, the most important object in the tabernacle. It was a strong chest made from acacia wood and covered with pure gold inside and outside. This chest would hold the stone tablets on which God had written his commands. Bezalel could not rush it. If the wood was cut incorrectly, the pieces would not fit. If the gold was shaped badly, the mistake would be seen. He measured, cut, joined, and covered the ark exactly as God had commanded. Then he made its golden cover, called the mercy seat. At each end, he shaped a cherub, a heavenly being made from hammered gold. Their wings stretched toward each other over the center. This was the place where God said he would meet with Moses and speak to him. The ark was small enough to be carried, yet it stood for something greater than any palace in Egypt. It reminded Israel that the God who ruled heaven had chosen to come near them. After the ark, Bezalel made a golden table for the bread of the presence. 12 loaves would be placed on it, representing the 12 tribes. The bread would remain before God as a sign that every tribe belonged to him. Then came one of Bezalel's hardest tasks, the golden lampstand. It could not be built from separate branches and connected later. The whole lampstand had to be hammered and shaped from one piece of pure gold. It had a center stem with 6 branches reaching out from its sides. Small cups shaped like almond flowers decorated each branch. One wrong strike could damage hours of careful work. Bezalel had to know when to hit the gold, where to shape it, and when to stop. Slowly, a plain piece of metal became a golden tree that would hold 7 lamps and shine inside the dark tent. While Bezalel shaped the holy objects, Oholiab and the other skilled workers prepared the tabernacle itself. They built strong frames from acacia wood and covered them with gold. They made bases to hold the frames steady and bars to lock them together. Everything had to be strong, but it also had to come apart when Israel moved. The workers also made large curtains from fine linen, using blue, purple, and scarlet thread. Images of cherubim were woven into the cloth. Other coverings were placed above them to protect the tent from sun, dust, and rain. This work demanded more than beauty. If one curtain was the wrong size, it would not join the next. If one base was weak, part of the structure could fall. Bezalel and Oholiab had to inspect the work, correct mistakes, and make sure everyone followed the same plan. Outside the tent, Bezalel made the bronze altar where Israel would bring sacrifices to God. He built it from acacia wood, covered it with bronze, and placed a bronze grate inside it. At each corner, he formed a horn as part of the altar itself. The altar stood in the courtyard before the entrance to the holy tent. It taught Israel something serious. Sinful people could not simply walk into the presence of a holy God as if nothing were wrong. A sacrifice had to be made. Near the altar, Bezalel made a large bronze basin where the priests would wash their hands and feet before serving. The bronze came from mirrors given by women who served near the entrance of the meeting tent. Something they had once used to look at themselves was now used to prepare priests to stand before God. Bezalel's team also made the clothing Aaron would wear as Israel's high priest. The most detailed parts were the ephod, and the breastplate. The ephod was a special woven garment made with gold, blue, purple, and scarlet thread. On its shoulders were 2 stones engraved with the names of the 12 tribes. Over Aaron's heart rested the breastplate. It held 12 precious stones, 1 for each tribe of Israel. Whenever Aaron entered God's presence, the names of all the tribes went with him. Even the smallest tribe was remembered. Not one name was missing. This was what made Bezalel's work different. He was not making beautiful objects simply so people would admire them. Every part taught Israel something about God. The ark spoke of his presence. The bread showed his care. The lampstand filled the holy place with light. The altar showed the cost of sin. The priest's clothing showed that Israel needed someone to stand before God for them. Bezalel had to hold all of this together. He had to lead workers, protect the materials, follow the plans, and make sure that beauty never became more important than obedience. The work continued for months. Day after day, hammer strikes rang through the camp. Needles passed through cloth. Wood was cut and smoothed. Stones were placed into gold. The piles of raw material slowly disappeared, and the pieces of the tabernacle took their place. At last, the work was finished. The workers brought everything to Moses: the tent and its coverings, the ark, the table, the lampstand, the altars, the basin, the priestly clothing, and every tool needed for worship. Now came the final test. Moses inspected it all. He had received the plans from God, so he knew what every piece should look like. He examined the work and compared it with what God had commanded. After months of effort, one careless change could have ruined the result. But Bezalel and the workers had not replaced God's plan with their own ideas. They had not made the work easier by removing difficult parts. They had followed every command. Scripture says that Moses looked over all the work and saw that they had completed it exactly as the Lord had commanded. Then Moses blessed them. Bezalel had completed the greatest work of his life, but the tabernacle was still lying in separate pieces. It had never been raised as one complete structure. On the first day of the new year, God told Moses to set it up. The bases were placed on the ground. The frames were raised and locked together. The curtains were spread across them. The ark was carried into the innermost room, called the Most Holy Place, and hidden behind a thick curtain. The table, lampstand, and altar of incense were placed in the outer room. The bronze altar and basin were set in the courtyard. At last, Moses hung the final curtain at the entrance. The work was complete. For months, Bezalel had measured, shaped, taught, and built. But there was one thing he could never create. He could build the place, but he could not fill it with the presence of God. Then a cloud came down. It covered the tabernacle, and the glory of the Lord filled the tent. God's presence was so powerful that even Moses could not enter. The people of Israel could see the cloud from their tents. The God who had rescued them from Egypt had truly come to live among them. When the cloud lifted, Israel traveled forward. When it remained over the tabernacle, they stayed where they were. By day, the cloud guided them. By night, fire shone inside it for the whole nation to see. One wrong move, and she would die. A foreign princess became queen of Israel. She brought her gods, spread the worship of Baal, and hunted the prophets of the Lord. For decades, no one could stop her, until one day, a man had enough. In the land of Phoenicia, in the city of Sidon, there lived a princess named Jezebel. From the time she was a small girl, she had watched the priests of Baal climb the temple steps at dawn, and she grew up believing that Baal controlled the rain and the harvest, and that no god in any land could rival him. She had never bowed to the God of Israel,
I will not bow.
and she never intended to. In the kingdom of Israel, a king named Ahab sat on the throne. He wanted an alliance with Phoenicia, and so he asked for Jezebel's hand in marriage. The marriage was arranged, and word came to Sidon that the princess would be sent north to become queen of a land she had never seen. She left the city at the head of a long procession, chariots and servants and chests filled with gold and silver. Behind her, carried carefully on wrapped litters, came the carved images of Baal and Asherah, wrapped in cloth, so the journey would not chip them. Her father had told her, before she left, that she was not just a bride being sent away, but a princess carrying her gods into a kingdom. She did not look back as the city disappeared behind her. She had already decided that wherever she was going, her gods were going with her. The journey took many days. At night, when the procession stopped, Jezebel could hear her attendants whispering about the country they were entering, a kingdom that worshipped a god they could not see, with no statue and no image. Some of them were afraid and said so quietly among themselves, wondering what kind of people lived without a god they could touch. She listened to them and said nothing, but she had already made up her mind that this god, whoever he was, would learn to share his land. When the gates of Samaria finally came into view, Jezebel did not see a foreign city waiting to be endured. She saw a kingdom waiting to be remade. She brought her gods with her. In Samaria, Jezebel built a temple to Baal and raised an altar inside it. She brought hundreds of priests of Baal into the palace, and she fed them at the king's table, watching them eat in the very halls where, generations before, kings of Israel had once been told there was no God beside the Lord. But what the people of Israel did not know was that this was no accident. No foreign wife simply keeping her childhood customs in a strange land. Jezebel intended to tear the worship of the Lord out of Israel completely, and she would not stop until every prophet who stood against her was dead. She sent soldiers to hunt down the prophets of the Lord. They went from village to village, dragging men from their homes before dawn, while their families watched and could do nothing. Many were killed where they stood. Others ran before the soldiers arrived, hiding among the rocks with no food and no fire, listening for footsteps above them and praying the footsteps would pass. A prophet of the Lord heard what happened. He walked into the king's court and stood before the throne, and the guards who might have stopped him simply stepped aside, as if something in his face told them not to.
As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word,
he said. The rain stopped, the crops withered, and the people of Israel grew thin with hunger. Mothers had nothing to feed their children and gave their own share away until they had nothing left for themselves.
No, I'm not hungry.
Men who once worked the fields now sat outside their empty storehouses with nothing to do but wait, too proud to beg and too hungry not to. Children who once played in the streets now sat quietly beside their mothers, too weak to run. For 3 years, no rain fell, and the hunger only grew worse. In the 3rd year, the prophet returned to the king. "Gather all of Israel to Mount Carmel," he said, "and bring the prophets of Baal with you." The people gathered at the mountain, climbing the slopes from every direction. Mothers carrying children too weak to walk on their own. Old men leaning on sticks, all of them drawn by the same hunger and the same unspoken hope that something was finally about to change. The prophets of Baal came down from Samaria, 450 of them, certain of what their God would do. The prophet of the Lord stood before the crowd. "How long will you waver between two gods?" he said. "If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him." The people said nothing. No one moved. He told them to bring the 2 bulls and lay them on 2 altars, but light no fire under either one. Whichever god answered with fire from heaven, that God was the true God. The prophets of Baal went first. They circled their altar from sunrise, calling out, cutting their own arms with knives. They screamed for hours. Nothing answered. Then the prophet of the Lord stepped forward. He laid his bull on the wood and dug a trench around the altar. And he had the people pour water over the offering again and again, soaking it through, filling the trench around the stones. He prayed, quietly enough that the crowd had to lean in to hear him. Lord, answer me, so this people will know that you are God. Fire fell from the sky. It came down so fast that the crowd staggered back. It consumed the bull, the wood, the stones, even the water in the trench, until there was nothing left but blackened ground. The people fell on their faces and cried out, "The Lord, He is God." The prophets of Baal were seized where they stood and led down into the valley. And there they were put to death, all 450 of them. A messenger ran from the mountain to bring the news to Jezebel. When she heard that her priests lay dead in the valley, she did not weep, and she did not rage where anyone could see her. Something cold and final settled into her instead, and she called for the man who had defeated them by name. Then she sent word to him, "By this time tomorrow, you will be dead, just as they are." The prophet fled into the wilderness that same night and did not stop for many days. He walked until his strength gave out, and he lay down under a tree and wished to die, certain that he was now the last man left who served the Lord. He fell asleep there, exhausted, and when he woke, food had been left beside him, though he had not seen anyone come or go. He ate and slept again, and woke to find more food waiting a second time. Strengthened, he walked on for 40 days until he reached a mountain, and there he climbed into a cave and stayed the night. A voice came to him in the cave. "What are you doing here?" "I have been very jealous for the Lord," he said, "but the people of Israel have killed your prophets, and now I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me too." He was told to stand outside the cave and wait. A great wind tore past the mountain, strong enough to split rock, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind came a shaking of the ground, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came fire, but the Lord was not in the fire either. Then, after the fire, came a quiet, low voice, and the prophet covered his face and stepped out to listen. He was told that he was not the only one left after all. There were others in Israel, thousands of them, who had never bowed to Baal. He was given new tasks to carry out, and a man was named who would one day finish what had begun on that mountain. Strengthened, the prophet left the cave and returned to the work he had been given. One of the most striking parts of Jezebel's life was when she helped the king take a vineyard that did not belong to him. Near the palace at Jezreel, a man owned a small vineyard that had belonged to his family for generations. A vineyard he had tended since he was a boy, walking those same rows with his father before him. The king wanted the land to make himself a garden, and he offered to buy it. But the man refused, because the land was not merely land to him. It was the only inheritance he had to leave behind, the one thing that would still belong to his family long after he was gone. So the king went home and lay down on his bed, facing the wall, and would not eat. Jezebel found him there, untouched food still on the table beside him.
"Get up. Eat something. I will get it for you."
The vineyard.
"I will get it for you."
Jezebel.
She arranged for the man to be falsely accused before the people of his own city. 2 men stood up and swore he had cursed God and the king. though it was not true, and no one in the crowd spoke up to defend him. Within days, he was dragged outside the walls and stoned to death on ground that had once belonged to his father and his father's father.
Before we continue, these videos take hours and hours to make, so if you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
Get up and take the vineyard. It once belonged to his father and his father's father.
The king rose and walked down to the vineyard and stood at last on the land he had wanted, as if it had cost him nothing at all. But the same prophet from Mount Carmel was waiting for him there. "You have done evil in the eyes of the Lord," the prophet said. "In the very place where this man's blood was spilled, dogs will lick up your own blood, and dogs will devour Jezebel." Years passed, and the words seemed to fade, the way old warnings do when nothing happens right away. Then, in a battle against a neighboring kingdom, the king was struck by an arrow as he stood in his chariot, and he bled out where he stood. When his men brought the chariot back, dogs licked his blood from the floor of it, just as the prophet had said. His sons ruled after him, one after the other, and through it all, Jezebel remained in the palace at Jezreel as queen mother, keeping the same gods, her devotion to Baal as unshaken as it had been the day she first crossed into Israel. But far away in a military camp in secret, a young prophet pulled a commander named Jehu into an inner room and poured oil over his head, anointing him king over Israel and telling him to put an end to Jezebel's house once and for all. The young prophet fled the camp the moment the oil had dried on Jehu's brow, before anyone could stop him. Jehu mounted his chariot that same day and rode hard for Jezreel. A watchman standing on the tower at Jezreel saw him coming and called down a warning, and the king, still recovering from wounds taken in battle, had his own chariot brought out and rode to meet him. "Do you come in peace?" the king asked. "How can there be peace?" Jehu called back. The king turned his chariot to flee, but Jehu drew his bow and struck him down before he had gone more than a few lengths, and the king fell in the very field that had once belonged to the man who was stoned for his vineyard. Jehu did not stop. He drove on toward the city. Jezebel heard that he was coming, and that the king was already dead. She did not run, and she did not hide. In the years since she had first arrived as a young princess from Sidon, she had buried a husband, watched her sons take the throne one after another, and never once bent her knee to the god of this land. She was not going to start now in the last hour she had left. She went to her room, and she painted her eyes carefully, the way she had every morning since she was a girl in Sidon, and she arranged her hair. And then she walked to a window above the city gate and looked down at the road, waiting. Jehu's chariot rolled up beneath the wall. "Have you come in peace, you murderer?" she called down to him. Jehu looked up at the window where she stood. "Who is on my side?" he shouted to the men gathered near the wall below her. A few of her own servants, standing just behind her in the room, looked down at him instead of at her. "Throw her down!" Jehu said. They seized Jezebel from behind and threw her from the window. She fell the length of the wall to the ground below, and the horses... Later, after Jehu had gone into the city and eaten and rested, he gave an order that she be buried, for she was, after all, a king's daughter. But when the men went out to the place where she had fallen, they found nothing left of her but her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands. The dogs had already come, just as it had been spoken on that hillside among the vines so many years before, and there was nothing more of Jezebel left for anyone to find. Imagine a man building an entire city, only to watch his own people choose sin over God. Nehemiah was a servant to the most powerful king on earth, a man who had wealth, safety, and an easy life. Until one day,
The walls of Jerusalem are broken, its gates are burnt, and the people live in shame.
Nehemiah went to the city to see it himself. But when he arrived, he realized that the situation was far worse than anyone had ever imagined. If you are tired of starting over and wonder if you should quit right now, then this story is exactly for you. Jerusalem's wall had been broken down. Its gates had been burned, and the people inside the city had little protection from their enemies.
Still waiting? We've been waiting for years. I'm sure these walls won't last another day.
Are we going to die here?
No, my child, God will save us.
And where have you been at? Quickly get ready to run your duties.
Hundreds of miles away, a Jewish servant stood beside the throne of the most powerful king in the land. His name was Nehemiah. He was a Jew, but he did not live in Jerusalem. Many years earlier, an enemy army had defeated his people and taken them away from their homeland. Jewish families were spread across foreign cities, where they had to begin new lives. Nehemiah lived in Susa, one of the main cities of the Persian Empire. He served King Artaxerxes as his cupbearer. He brought wine to the king and made sure the king's drink was safe. This was an important job. Artaxerxes trusted Nehemiah with his life and kept him close to the royal table. Because Nehemiah stood so near him, the king could notice even a small change in his face. Some Jews had already been allowed to return to Jerusalem. They had rebuilt the temple, and families had begun living in the land again. But Jerusalem was still badly damaged. Much of the wall around the city was broken, and the gates had been destroyed by fire. One day, Nehemiah's brother Hanani arrived in Susa with a group of men from Judah. Nehemiah quickly went to them and asked about the Jews who had returned. Were they safe? How was life in Jerusalem? What did the city look like now? The answer was worse than he expected. The people there are in great trouble and shame, the men told him. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. A broken wall was not only an ugly sign of the past, it also meant the city was open to raiders and enemy soldiers. Anyone with enough men could enter through the gaps. The people lived in shame, because the city of their ancestors still had no real protection. When Nehemiah heard this, he sat down and wept. For several days he mourned, refused food, and prayed to God. Jerusalem was hundreds of miles away, but its pain became his pain. Nehemiah began his prayer by praising God. Then he admitted that the people of Israel had broken God's commands. He did not speak as if only other Jews were guilty. He said that he and his own family had sinned too. He remembered a promise God had made to Israel. If the people turned back to God, he would gather them again, even if they had been spread to the farthest parts of the world. Then Nehemiah asked for something clear. He was no longer asking God to help Jerusalem through some unknown person in the future. Nehemiah was getting ready to act himself. Give your servant success today, he prayed, and give him mercy in the sight of this man. The man, he meant, was King Artaxerxes. Nehemiah could not leave the palace whenever he wished. He needed the king to let him go. He also needed help for the long journey and supplies for the work. Everything depended on the answer of the man he served each day. For about 4 months, Nehemiah carried this pain while he continued working. He poured the king's wine and stood near the throne, but the broken walls of Jerusalem stayed in his mind. He waited for the right time to speak. He did not know if the king would listen, become angry, or refuse his request. Then one day, the king looked at him and saw that something was wrong. Nehemiah was carrying wine to Artaxerxes, as he had done many times before. Until that day, he had never looked sad while serving the king. For months, he had hidden his grief and done his work. This time, the pain showed on his face. The king noticed at once. "Why does your face look sad when you are not sick?" Artaxerxes asked. "This must be sadness in your heart." Nehemiah became terrified. The king had asked a direct question, and Nehemiah could no longer hide the truth. He did not know what would happen when Artaxerxes learned that his trusted servant wanted to leave the palace and rebuild a distant city. "May the king live forever," Nehemiah answered. "Why should I not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" For a moment, Nehemiah waited. Then Artaxerxes asked the question that could change everything. "What do you want?" Nehemiah had waited 4 months for a chance like this. Then he spoke. "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has pleased you, send me to Judah, to the city where my ancestors are buried, so I can rebuild it." While the king was thinking about the question, the wife of Artaxerxes was preparing herself to go to him. Her name is Damaspia, and she was the queen of Persia. She went over to the king and sat next to him. Then he asked, "How long will your journey take? When will you return?" Nehemiah gave him a time, and the king agreed to let him go. Nehemiah did not stop there. During the last 4 months, he had thought carefully about what the work would need. He asked the king for letters to the governors west of the Euphrates River. These letters would order them to let Nehemiah pass safely through their lands. He also asked for a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest. Nehemiah needed wood for the gates, the wall, and the house where he would live. Artaxerxes gave him everything he asked for. Nehemiah believed the king had agreed because God's good hand was on him. Artaxerxes also sent army officers and horsemen to protect Nehemiah during the dangerous journey. Nehemiah left Susa with the king's letters in his hands and soldiers riding beside him. He now had permission, protection, and wood for the work. But the king could not force Jerusalem's enemies to welcome him. Before Nehemiah reached the broken wall, powerful men in the land were already watching him. The journey was long. Nehemiah and the soldiers crossed one part of the empire after another. At each important border, he gave the king's letters to a governor. After the long journey, Nehemiah finally arrived in Jerusalem. 2 powerful men soon heard that he had come. One was Sanballat the Horonite. The other was Tobiah, an official from Ammon. They were deeply upset that someone had come to help the people of Israel. Nehemiah had not moved a single stone, but he already had enemies who did not want Jerusalem to become strong again. Nehemiah did not begin the work as soon as he arrived. For 3 days, he stayed in Jerusalem and told no one about the plan God had placed in his heart. The priests, leaders, officials, and ordinary people did not yet know why he had truly come. Then, while the city slept, Nehemiah went out to see the damage for himself.
I never thought it would be this bad. Can this even be rebuilt?
Mom, I'm hungry. We haven't eaten in days.
Soon, my child, soon.
He took only a few men with him. He rode one animal. Nehemiah did not want to draw attention. He also did not want to announce a great plan before he understood how much damage had been done. In the darkness, he went out through the valley gate. He passed near the serpent's well. Everywhere he looked, He saw burned gates, fallen stones, and large piles of broken rock. Nehemiah went down into the valley and continued looking at the wall before returning through the valley gate. The city officials did not know where he had gone or what he had done that night. Nehemiah had not told the Jewish leaders, priests, nobles, workers, or anyone else who would later help rebuild. After he had seen the wall, Nehemiah called the leaders together. "You can see the trouble we are in," he told them. "Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, so we will no longer live in shame." Then he told them how God had helped him. He explained what had happened in the palace and how the king had supported the plan. The people now understood that Nehemiah had not arrived with only a dream. He had permission from Artaxerxes and help from the king's own forest. The people were ready, but their enemies were ready too. Sanballat and Tobiah heard about the plan. This time, another man joined them. His name was Geshem, an Arab leader. The three men laughed at the Jews and treated their plan as foolish. "What are you doing?" they asked. "Are you rebelling against the king?" This was not only an insult. If Artaxerxes believed Jerusalem was planning a rebellion, Persian soldiers could end the work before it started. Nehemiah did not step back. "The God of heaven will give us success," he answered. "We, his servants, will begin rebuilding. But you have no share, no right, and no history in Jerusalem." The work had hardly begun, but Nehemiah now knew exactly who wanted to stop it. Nehemiah divided the work among priests, nobles, gold workers, merchants, and ordinary families. Each group received its own part of the wall. Instead of placing everyone in one area, he sent teams to work around the whole city at the same time. The high priest and the other priests began near the sheep gate. Families repaired the parts near their homes. Workers from towns outside Jerusalem came to help. Gold workers and sellers lifted stones beside priests and rulers. Some nobles refused to work, but most of the people joined the great task. Day after day, broken places began to close. Stones rose where piles of rubble had rested for many years. The work required more than placing one stone on top of another. The people first had to pull burned wood and broken rock out of the gaps. They had to find stones that were still strong enough to use. Heavy pieces had to be lifted from the ground and carried into place. New wooden doors had to be built for the gates. Beams, locks, and bars had to be prepared so each entrance could be closed when danger came. One ruler worked with the help of his daughters. Men who normally made gold objects or mixed perfume now used their hands on the wall. Many families worked close to their own houses. This gave them a clear reason to do the work well. Slowly, separate pieces became one wall around the city. Sanballat heard about the progress, and it made him furious. His first warning had not frightened Nehemiah away. Now the wall was truly rising. Sanballat stood before his officials and soldiers and began laughing at the Jews again. "What are these weak Jews doing?" he asked. "Do they think they can finish this work? Can they bring burned stones back to life from these piles of rubbish?" Tobiah stood beside him and added another insult. "Even if a fox climbed on their wall, it would fall down." The words reached Nehemiah, but he did not answer with more insults. He prayed and continued the work. The people kept lifting stones. Team after team repaired its part until the wall stood at half its full height around Jerusalem. The Bible gives a simple reason for this progress. The people had decided to work with all their hearts. Sanballat and Tobiah could laugh at a pile of stones. It was harder to laugh at a wall that was already half rebuilt. Their insults had failed, so they prepared something much more dangerous. Sanballat and Tobiah joined with the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod. Together, they planned to attack Jerusalem. They wanted to enter suddenly, confuse the workers, and stop the wall before it was finished. News of the plan reached Jerusalem just when the workers were growing tired. Large piles of broken stone still covered the ground. The workers had spent their strength clearing rubble and carrying heavy stones. Now they heard that armed enemies were coming from different directions. Jewish families who lived near the enemy came again and again with the same warning. The attackers were preparing to surround them. Fear spread through the workers. The wall was still open in many places. If the enemy attacked through one of those gaps, families inside the city could die. Even if no army came, fear alone might stop the work. Nehemiah placed armed men behind the lowest and weakest parts of the wall. Those were the places where an enemy could enter most easily. He placed the men together by family. Fathers, sons, and brothers stood beside one another with swords, spears, and bows. Each man knew that he was protecting the people he loved. Then Nehemiah looked at the tired and frightened crowd. "Do not be afraid of them," he said. "Remember the Lord, who is great and powerful. Fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes." The enemies learned that the Jews knew about their plan. The workers were armed and watching the open parts of the wall. The attackers had lost their God had ruined their plan, the city, and the people returned to work. But no one knew whether the enemy would try again. From that day forward, the building place looked different. Half of Nehemiah's men worked, while the other half stood guard with spears, shields, bows, and armor. The builders wore swords at their sides. Men who carried heavy loads kept one hand ready to reach for a weapon. Every stone was lifted while guards watched the hills. The workers were spread far apart because the wall was so long. Nehemiah kept a man with a trumpet close beside him. If enemies attacked one part of the wall, the trumpet would call everyone to that place. "Wherever you hear the trumpet," Nehemiah told them, "come together there. Our God will fight for us." The people worked from the first morning light until the stars appeared. Nehemiah, his relatives, his servants, and the guards remained ready. They slept in their clothes and kept their weapons close, even when they went to get water. The enemy outside the wall was not the only danger. While the stones continued rising, a terrible problem appeared inside Jerusalem. A large group of workers and their wives cried out against the richer Jews. Their own people were making money from their suffering. Some families had many children, but did not have enough grain to feed them. Others had given their fields, vineyards, and houses to lenders so they could buy food during a time of hunger. Some families had borrowed money to pay the king's tax. Their debt grew until they had to give their sons and daughters away as servants. Some daughters had already been taken. The parents could not bring them home because their land now belonged to rich men from their own nation. These families were helping rebuild Jerusalem, but they were afraid of what they would find when they returned home. A father might spend the day protecting the city, while a rich lender prepared to take his field. A mother might carry food to the workers, while wondering how she would feed her children the next morning. The outside enemies wanted to break the wall. Inside the city, hunger and debt were beginning to break the people. When Nehemiah heard their cries, he became very angry. But he did not allow his anger to control him. He stopped and thought carefully before he acted. Then he confronted the nobles and officials. "You are charging interest to your own people," he told them. They were using the pain of other Jews to make themselves richer. Nehemiah called a large public meeting so everyone could hear the truth. In front of the crowd, Nehemiah told the nobles what he and his brothers had been doing. Whenever they could, they had used their own money to buy Jewish people out of slavery in foreign lands. Now, these nobles were selling their own Jewish brothers and sisters into slavery again. The nobles had no answer. They stood silently, because they could not defend what they had done. "What you are doing is not good," Nehemiah said. "Should you not fear our God and avoid the shame our enemies will bring against us?" Sanballat and Tobiah already wanted a reason to shame Jerusalem. The nobles were helping those enemies by hurting their own people. Nehemiah told them exactly what they had to do. They must return the fields, vineyards, olive trees, and houses they had taken. They must also return the extra grain, wine, oil, and money they had demanded. The nobles agreed. "We will give everything back," they said. "We will ask for nothing more. We will do what you say." Nehemiah did not trust words alone. He called the priests and made the nobles promise before God that they would obey. Then Nehemiah shook out the fold of his robe as if he were emptying something from it. "May God shake every man out of his house and property if he does not keep this promise," Nehemiah said. "May that man be shaken out and left with nothing." The whole crowd answered, "Amen." Then they praised God, and the nobles did what they had promised. Nehemiah followed the same rules in his own life. For 12 years, he served as governor of Judah. Earlier, governors had demanded food, wine, and money from the people. Even their servants had treated the people badly. Nehemiah did not make himself rich from his job, and he never asked for the governor's food money. The people already carried heavy burdens, and he refused to make those burdens heavier. Instead, Nehemiah fed 150 Jews and officials at his own table, as well as visitors from nearby nations. He paid for the food himself. He had ordered the nobles to stop using power to hurt the poor, and he made sure that he did not do the same thing.
Jerusalem is strong again.
As long as we keep listening to God, Jerusalem will never fall apart again.
You speak the truth.
Amen.
It is easy to say. But don't you remember what happened after the death of Joshua? The land of Canaan, they all departed from God. None of them remained faithful.
While the nobles returned what they had taken, the workers continued building.
Come.
Soon, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem heard that every gap in the wall had been closed. Only the doors of the gates still needed to be placed. The work was almost finished. Sanballat and Geshem tried another plan. They invited Nehemiah to meet them on the plain of Ono, far away from Jerusalem. Their message sounded peaceful, as if they wanted to end the disagreement. But Nehemiah remembered their insults, threats, and plan to attack. He knew they wanted to harm him. If Nehemiah left Jerusalem, he would be far from the workers and guards. No trumpet could call men to save him on the plain of Ono. Nehemiah sent back a clear answer. "I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go to you?" Sanballat sent the same invitation 4 times. 4 times, Nehemiah gave the same answer. He would not leave the work, and he would not walk into their trap.
The king must know.
On the 5th try, Sanballat changed his plan. His servant came with an open letter. A normal letter was closed, so only the person receiving it could read it. This letter was open, which meant anyone who carried it or saw it could read the message. Sanballat wanted the story inside it to spread. The letter said that nearby nations had heard a story, and Geshem himself said the story was true. It claimed that Nehemiah and the Jews were planning to fight against Persia. It said Nehemiah was rebuilding the wall because he wanted to make himself king of Judah. It even claimed that Nehemiah had chosen prophets to announce that a new king had appeared in Jerusalem. Then the letter warned that King Artaxerxes would soon hear the story. Sanballat told Nehemiah to meet with him before that happened. This lie was dangerous, Artaxerxes was the same king who had allowed Nehemiah to rebuild the wall. If he believed that Nehemiah had used his help to prepare a rebellion, he might send the Persian army against Jerusalem. Sanballat wanted Nehemiah to become afraid and leave the final work unfinished. Nehemiah denied the story at once. "Nothing you are saying has happened," he answered. "You have invented this story in your own mind." Nehemiah understood what Sanballat wanted. His enemy hoped fear would make the workers' hands weak before the gates were finished. Nehemiah answered with a very short prayer. "Now, God, make my hands strong." The open letter did not stop him, so his enemies tried one final trap. This time, the danger came from a man who claimed to speak for God. Nehemiah went to the house of a man named Shemaiah. The man had shut himself inside. When Nehemiah arrived, Shemaiah gave him a frightening warning. "Let us meet inside the temple and close the doors," Shemaiah said. "Men are coming to kill you. They are coming tonight." The warning was meant to make Nehemiah run before he had time to think. But something was wrong. Nehemiah was not a priest, so he was not allowed to enter that part of the temple. If he entered to save himself, he would break God's law. His enemies could then call him a sinner and destroy the people's trust in him. Nehemiah refused. "Should a man like me run away?" he asked. "Should I enter the temple just to save my life? I will not go in." Then Nehemiah understood the whole trap. God had not sent Shemaiah. Tobiah and Sanballat had paid him. They could not prove that Nehemiah had done anything wrong, so they wanted to frighten him into doing something wrong. Shemaiah was not the only one. A woman named Noadiah and other prophets also tried to frighten Nehemiah. But fear had not controlled him in the palace, beside the open wall, or inside Shemaiah's house. He stayed in Jerusalem, and the last gates began to close. Every trap had failed. Sanballat and Tobiah had laughed at the workers. They had planned an attack, sent false letters, invited Nehemiah away, and paid people to frighten him. None of it stopped the work. The wall was finished on the 25th day of the month called Elul. The people had completed it in only 52 days. They had lifted burned stones, cleared huge piles of rubble, guarded their families, and worked while enemies watched them. They had carried tools besides swords and continued when their strength was almost gone. Now every gap was closed. The gates that had once been burned stood in place again. News spread through the lands around Jerusalem. Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, and the nearby nations saw a finished wall where open ruins had stood only weeks before. Their confidence disappeared. They knew that the work had been completed with God's help. But Nehemiah knew that finishing the wall did not finish his job. A wall could not protect the city by itself. Jerusalem needed guards, leaders, families, and people who would obey God. Nehemiah had helped repair the outside of the city. Now, the life inside it also needed to be rebuilt. There was still danger inside Judah. Tobiah had close connections with several important families. Some Jewish nobles had made personal promises of loyalty to him. Tobiah was also connected to them through marriage. These nobles often spoke well of Tobiah in front of Nehemiah. Then they reported Nehemiah's words and actions back to Tobiah. Even though the wall was complete, Tobiah continued sending letters to frighten him. Nehemiah did not give in. Tobiah had failed to control him while the city was open, and Nehemiah would not allow him to control Jerusalem now. Nehemiah appointed gatekeepers, singers, and Levites to their duties. He placed his brother Hanani in charge of Jerusalem. Hanani was the same man who had first brought the terrible news to Susa. Nehemiah also chose Hananiah, the commander of the city's strong building. Nehemiah trusted Hananiah because he was an honest man who feared God more than most people did. Nehemiah gave the two men clear orders. The city gates must not be opened very early in the morning. The guards had to wait until the sun was high enough to see clearly. At night, the gates had to be shut and locked before the guards left their places. Nehemiah also gave ordinary people turns guarding the city. Some stood at places along the wall, and others guarded the area near their own homes. Now Jerusalem had a strong wall, but another problem remained. The city was large, and very few people lived inside it. Many homes had never been rebuilt. There were not enough people to fill the streets or guard every part of the city. Nehemiah decided to count and register the people by their families. While preparing to do this, he found an old family record. It listed the Jews who had returned from Babylon many years before. The record named their leaders and showed how many people had returned from each family and town. It included priests, Levites, singers, gatekeepers, temple servants, and ordinary Israelites. It also recorded the gold, silver, and special clothes that people had given for God's work. The names showed that the return to Jerusalem had not begun with Nehemiah. Other families had left Babylon and made sacrifices long before he came. Their work had helped rebuild the temple. Now Nehemiah and the people of his time had rebuilt the wall. Each generation had received a part of the same great task. After the people settled in their towns, they came together in Jerusalem. A huge crowd filled the open square in front of the water gate. This time, they had not come to lift stones or prepare for war. They wanted to hear God's law. The people asked Ezra to bring out the book of the law of Moses. Ezra was a priest and teacher who had studied God's commands for many years. He stood on a large wooden platform that had been built for this day. The platform lifted him above the crowd so everyone could see him. When he opened the book in front of the people, the whole crowd rose to its feet. Ezra praised the Lord, the great God, and the people lifted their hands. Amen, amen, they answered. Then they bowed with their faces toward the ground and worshipped God. Ezra began reading early in the morning. He continued until the middle of the day. Men, women, and children old enough to understand stood together and listened. Many of them had never heard the whole law read aloud. For hours, their attention stayed on the words. Levites moved among the crowd and explained the meaning in simple words. The people did not only hear the law, they began to understand what God had told Israel to do. As they listened, they saw how far their lives had moved away from his commands. People began to weep. Nehemiah, Ezra, and the Levites told them not to mourn that day. "This day is holy to the Lord your God," Nehemiah said. "Do not cry. Go and enjoy good food and sweet drinks. Send some to anyone who has nothing ready. This day is holy to our Lord. Do not be filled with sadness, because the joy of the Lord is your strength." The people went away to eat, drink, and share their food. Great joy filled the city because they now understood the words that had been read to them. The law had first made them cry because it showed their sin. Then it gave them joy because God had not forgotten them. He was teaching them how to return to Him. The next day, the leaders of the families met with Ezra. They wanted to study the law more carefully. As they read, they found a command about a special celebration called the Feast of Booths. During this feast, the people of Israel were supposed to live in small shelters made from branches for 7 days. The shelters reminded them that their ancestors had lived in tents after God brought them out of slavery in Egypt. The leaders sent the news through Jerusalem and the nearby towns. They told the people to go into the hills and gather branches from olive trees, myrtle trees, palm trees, and other trees with many leaves. The people obeyed. They built shelters on their rooftops and inside their yards. They placed more shelters in the temple yards and in the open squares near the water gate and the gate of Ephraim. For 7 days, families left their normal rooms and lived under the branches. Each day, Ezra continued reading from the book of the law. The people celebrated with great joy. Israel had kept this feast before, but it had not been celebrated in this way since the time of Joshua. When the feast ended, the people gathered again. This time, they refused food, wore rough cloth, and placed dust on their heads to show that they were sorry for their sins. For part of the day, they listened to God's law. For another part, they admitted their sins and worshipped. The Levites led a long prayer. They told the story of Israel from the beginning. God had chosen Abraham and promised him a land. He had seen the suffering of Israel in Egypt and divided the sea so the people could escape. He had guided them with a cloud during the day and fire during the night. He had given them food when they were hungry and water when they were thirsty. But the people had often refused to obey. They made an idol while Moses was on the mountain. They forgot what God had done and wanted to return to slavery. Still, God did not leave them. He was ready to forgive, slow to anger, and full of mercy. God led Israel into the land he had promised. He gave them cities, houses, fields, wells, fruit trees, and food. But when their lives became comfortable, they turned away again. They killed prophets who warned them. Because they refused to listen, enemies defeated them. Whenever the people cried out, God showed mercy and saved them. But after they were safe, they returned to their old sins. This happened again and again. At last, Israel and Judah were taken from their land. That was why Jewish families like Nehemiah's lived far away in places such as Persia. The people standing in Jerusalem understood that the story was about them too. They were back in the land, but they still lived under the rule of a foreign king. Persia received part of their crops and wealth. They were in trouble because their people had disobeyed God for many years. At the end of the prayer, the leaders made a written promise. Nehemiah placed his name on it first. Priests, Levites, and family leaders added their names and sealed the agreement. The people promised that they would obey God's law. They would not allow marriage to pull their families into the worship of other gods. They would keep the Sabbath holy. If foreign sellers came to Jerusalem on that day with grain or other goods, the people would not buy from them. Every 7th year, they would allow the land to rest and forgive certain debts. They also promised to support the temple. Each family would give what was needed for its work. They would bring wood for the altar, the first part of their grain and fruit, and a share of their crops. The Levites, priests, singers, gatekeepers, and temple servants needed this support so they could continue their work. The people ended their promise with clear words. We will not neglect the house of our God.
At last, Jerusalem has found peace.
Mom! Mom! Look at me! Jerusalem can't get better than this!
I've seen the same thing before. I just wonder when it will fall.
The wall was standing, worship had returned, and the people had made their promise. But Jerusalem still needed more families inside it. Most Jews lived in smaller towns and villages across Judah. They had fields, animals, neighbors, and homes there. Moving to Jerusalem meant leaving much of that behind. The city was now safe, but many streets were still empty, and many houses still needed work. The leaders agreed to live in Jerusalem, but they were not enough. The people cast lots to choose one family out of every 10 to move into the city. The other 9 families could remain in their towns. Some men also chose to move without being selected, and the people thanked God for their courage. The chosen families said goodbye to familiar fields and neighbors. They entered through the restored gates and began new lives. Houses were repaired, children filled the streets, and workers opened places for their trades. Priests, Levites, gatekeepers, temple servants, officials, and ordinary families took their places. The wall no longer stood around an almost empty city. Jerusalem was alive again. Then the day came to dedicate the wall. Levites were called to Jerusalem from all the towns where they lived. They came to lead songs of thanks with cymbals, harps, and lyres. Priests and Levites made themselves clean for worship. They also prepared the people, the gates, and the wall for the holy celebration. The stones had already been placed, but Nehemiah did not want the day to honor human strength. The people knew that God had protected them and given them success. The wall would be given to him with songs and thanks. Nehemiah brought the leaders of Judah to the top of the wall. Months earlier, Tobiah had laughed and said that even a fox could knock it down. Now leaders, priests, singers, and musicians stood together on top of it. Tobiah's old insult looked foolish beneath their feet. Nehemiah divided the singers and leaders into two large groups. They would walk around the city in opposite directions and meet at the house of God. The first group turned to the right and walked toward the refuse gate. Singers went in front, giving thanks to God as they passed over stones the workers had lifted by hand. Leaders followed them, and priests carried trumpets. Ezra walked with this group, while the people below watched. Then they moved above David's old house. Nehemiah had once examined these same places in darkness. That night, rubble had blocked his animal, and almost no one knew why he had come. He had moved quietly with only a few men. Now, a huge group marched over the restored wall in daylight. The second group went in the other direction. Nehemiah walked behind it with half of the leaders. The two groups walked around Jerusalem from opposite sides. Their feet passed over every repaired part. No gap made them turn back. No fallen gate stopped them. The whole wall had been restored. Both groups entered the house of God. The singers raised their voices, and the priests sounded their trumpets. The people offered great sacrifices and celebrated because God had filled them with joy. Women and children rejoiced with the men. On that day, Nehemiah also placed men in charge of the rooms where gifts, grain, and other supplies for the temple were kept. The people brought what the priests and Levites needed. Jerusalem needed more than one great day of celebration. It needed honest people who would keep worship going after the crowds returned home. Nehemiah remained governor of Judah for 12 years. He continued working for the good of Jerusalem. But when King Artaxerxes first allowed him to leave Susa, Nehemiah had promised to return at last. He had to keep that promise. In the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, Nehemiah left Judah and returned to the king. He traveled back across the same empire he had crossed at the beginning. Behind him, Jerusalem had walls, gates, guards, leaders, families, temple workers, and a written promise from the people that they would obey God. Nehemiah had faced enemies outside Jerusalem and greed inside it. He had watched builders work beside armed guards. He had rejected lies, threats, secret traps, and a false warning spoken in God's name. The city had survived all of it. There was reason to believe that Jerusalem would remain strong after he left. But stone walls were easier to watch than human hearts. After some time in Persia, Nehemiah asked Artaxerxes to let him return to Judah. The Bible does not say exactly how long he had been gone, but when Nehemiah entered Jerusalem again, he found that the people had already begun breaking the promises they had written and sealed. The first sign was waiting inside the temple itself. Eliashib the priest was closely connected to Tobiah. While Nehemiah was away, Eliashib prepared a large room for Tobiah inside the temple yards. This was not an empty room that no one needed. It had been used to store grain gifts, incense, temple tools, wine, oil, and the shares that supported the Levites, singers, and gatekeepers. Those holy supplies had been removed. Tobiah had moved his own furniture into the room. The same man who had laughed at the builders now had a private room at the temple. He had joined plans to attack Jerusalem, sent letters to frighten Nehemiah, and helped pay a false prophet. Sanballat and Tobiah had failed to enter the city by breaking its wall. Now Tobiah had entered because a priest opened the door for him. When Nehemiah saw the room, he became furious. He picked up Tobiah's things and threw them outside. Then he ordered the rooms to be cleaned and made ready for holy use again. He returned the grain, incense, and temple tools to their proper places. Nehemiah had not spent years protecting Jerusalem from Tobiah just to find that one of its priests had welcomed him into the house of God. But Tobiah's room was only the beginning. The Levites and singers had not received the food the people had promised to give them. They could not feed their families, so many had left their temple work and returned to their fields. The worship Nehemiah had carefully restored was beginning to fall apart because the people had kept their grain for themselves. Nehemiah confronted the officials. "Why have you neglected the house of God?" he demanded. Then he called the Levites and singers back to Jerusalem and placed them in their proper jobs. All Judah began bringing grain, wine, and oil into the storage rooms again. This time, Nehemiah chose trustworthy men to control the supplies. One was a priest, one was a teacher, and others were Levites. Their duty was to give each worker a fair share. After seeing Tobiah living in a storage room, Nehemiah would not leave those rooms without honest men watching them. Nehemiah prayed, "Remember me for this, my God. Do not forget the faithful work I have done for your house and its services." Then he saw another promise being broken in public. On the Sabbath, some men in Judah were crushing grapes to make wine. Others loaded grain, grapes, figs, wine, and many other goods onto donkeys. They carried everything into Jerusalem to sell. Men from the city of Tyre brought fish and other goods through the gates. The people had clearly promised that they would not buy or sell on the Sabbath. Now the holy day had become another busy market day. Nehemiah warned the sellers. Then he confronted the nobles of Judah. "What is this evil thing you are doing?" he asked. "You are treating the Sabbath like an ordinary day. Did your ancestors not do the same? Was that not one reason disaster came upon our nation and this city? Now you are bringing more anger against Israel by breaking the Sabbath again." Jerusalem's walls had been rebuilt, but the people were returning to the same choices that had helped destroy their nation before. Nehemiah ordered the gates to be closed before the Sabbath began. They could not be opened until the day was over. He placed some of his own servants at the gates so no one could carry goods into the city. The sellers did not give up at once. Some spent the night outside Jerusalem with their goods. They may have hoped that people would walk outside the wall to buy from them. Perhaps they thought Nehemiah would stop caring after 1 or 2 weeks. He did not stop watching. "Why are you spending the night beside the wall?" Nehemiah warned them. "If you do this again, I will use force against you." After that, the sellers stopped coming on the Sabbath. Nehemiah told the Levites to make themselves clean and guard the gates so the day would remain holy. Again he prayed, "Remember me for this also, my God, and show mercy to me because of your great love." The last problem reached deep into the homes of Judah. Some Jewish men had married women from the nations around them. The problem was not that these women came from another country. The danger was that they worshipped other gods and could lead Jewish families away from the Lord. This had happened many times in Israel's past. Many children from these marriages spoke the languages of their mothers, but they could no longer speak the language of Judah. They were growing up unable to understand the language used to teach God's law. The promises made before Nehemiah left were already disappearing in the next generation. Nehemiah confronted the men very strongly. and made them promise that they would not continue leading their families away from God. He reminded them of King Solomon. There was no king like Solomon among many nations, Nehemiah said. God loved him and made him king over all Israel. Yet women who worshipped foreign gods led even him into sin. Should we now hear that you are doing the same evil thing and becoming unfaithful to our God? Solomon had been famous for wisdom, power, and wealth. If even he had fallen into this trap, ordinary men could not pretend there was no danger. Then Nehemiah learned that the problem reached into the high priest's own family. One of the grandsons of Joiada, the son of the high priest Eliashib, had married a daughter of Sanballat. Sanballat had tried to stop the wall with insults and threats. He had planned an attack and spread a false story about Nehemiah. Now he had a family connection that reached toward the high priest's house. Nehemiah drove the man away. He would not allow Sanballat to gain through marriage the power he had failed to gain through fear. Nehemiah made the priests and Levites clean themselves from foreign worship. He gave each person a clear job. He arranged the wood gifts and the first part of the crops at the proper times. He repaired everything that had been neglected, returned people to their work, guarded the gates, and removed the power his enemies had gained while he was away. None of these repairs gave Nehemiah the same clear victory as the finished wall. When Tobiah's furniture was thrown outside, Tobiah's influence did not suddenly disappear. When the temple workers returned, the people still had to keep bringing food. When the Sabbath gates closed one week, someone had to guard them again the next week. When Nehemiah corrected the families, parents still had to teach their children after he walked away. This work was slower because it had no final stone. Nehemiah could give orders, choose honest leaders, remove open sin, and remind the people of God's law. But he could not make every person remain faithful. Each family had to decide what kind of life would continue inside its home. But this ending was not as simple as the day the wall was finished. In 52 days, the builders could see every hole in the wall close. They could place the last gate in position and know the job was done. The people inside the wall were different. Their hearts could not be repaired once and then forgotten. They had heard God's law and cried over their sins. They had celebrated his mercy. One wrong choice, and the woman he loved disappeared into the night. A simple farmer received an unfaithful woman from God to be his wife. He obeyed. Years passed. A family was built. And against all reason, he fell deeply in love with her until one night she decided she wanted more. The word of the Lord came to Hosea. He told Hosea to take a wife who would be unfaithful to him. This would show how far the people of the land had wandered from God. Hosea obeyed. He took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, to be his wife. In the beginning, the house of Hosea was a happy one. Every morning before the sun was up, Hosea and Gomer walked out to the fields together. They worked side by side all day, breaking the ground, planting the seed, pulling weeds from between the rows. At midday, they sat together under the same tree and ate bread and a bit of cheese. Gomer had a son. The Lord told Hosea to name him Jezreel because of the killing that happened there. Hosea would carry the boy on his shoulders out to the fields in the cool morning air and set him down in the shade while he worked. The boy would fall asleep to the sound of his father's hands moving through the soil. Gomer had another child, a daughter. The Lord told Hosea to name her Lo-Ruhamah, which means not loved, because God said he would stop showing mercy to Israel. Later, Gomer had a third child, a son. The Lord told Hosea to name him Lo-Ami, which means not mine, because Israel had turned so far from God that they were no longer acting like his people. But Hosea did not know yet that these names were not just names. They were a warning. sitting quietly inside his own house, waiting for the day the whole nation would understand what they meant. What was happening in his own home was about to happen to the whole nation, and no one watching his children grow up in that house could have guessed it yet. There were evenings when the work ran late, and Hosea and Gomer walked home together as the sun went down behind the hills. One evening, they stopped at the edge of the field to rest. Gomer looked up at the sky, watching the colors spread out over the grain. Hosea was not looking at the sky, he was looking at her face, watching the light from the sunset catch in her eyes. He didn't say anything, he just watched her. And then they picked up their tools and walked the rest of the way home in the dark. There was a season when the rains came late, and the whole household worked harder than usual to carry water from the well to the rows that were drying out. Gomer carried jars on her shoulders back and forth all day, and her arms ached, but the crop held. They celebrated quietly that year when the harvest came in heavier than they expected, and Hosea brought home a bit of honey from a trader passing through. After some time, Gomer began to change. She looked at her life with Hosea and thought it was too small. She started going to the market more often than she needed to, staying longer than the errands required. She saw other women there wearing nice clothes and jewelry, carrying wine and oil they hadn't earned, and she wanted that kind of life for herself. She came home later and later, and she stopped walking out to the fields with Hosea in the mornings, telling him she was tired. One morning she did not come home at all. She had left in the night while the house was quiet and gone looking for other men who she thought would give her bread, water, and wine. She walked away from Hosea's house and did not look back at it once. One of the hardest parts of Hosea's life began the morning after she left. He woke up and reached for her, and she wasn't there. He didn't run after her that day. He went out to the fields alone and worked the same ground they used to work together, and at midday, he sat under the same tree by himself, with no one to share the bread with. Some evenings, he would stop at the same spot where they used to watch the sunset, and he would just stand there, alone. He waited at home with the children, feeding them, putting them to bed. While he waited, the Lord told him what was happening to Gomer. Even far away, she was chasing after the men she'd run to, but she would not catch them. She would look for them, but she would not find them. Gomer moved from town to town. In the first town she came to, a man took her in for a while and gave her a string of beads, and she wore them through the streets, thinking they made her someone new. She stayed in his house through one season, and she put on her jewelry every morning, believing she had found the life she was looking for. She didn't realize that everything she had, the food, the wine, the oil, had really come from God all along, and not from this man. She thought she was moving up in life. She wasn't. God made her path harder. The man who had taken her in grew tired of her and sent her away before the next season turned. She went to a second town, and there, a different man let her stay for a short while, but he too grew cold toward her. And one evening she came back from the market to find her things set outside his door. She knocked, and no one answered. The things she used to get easily started disappearing. The men who once let her into their homes started shutting their doors instead. She kept moving from place to place, and the harder she searched, the less she found in her hands at the end of each day. One of the hardest nights of Gomer's life was the night she had nowhere left to go. She sat outside the gate of a town in the cold. She thought back to her old life, the fields at sunrise, the evenings walking home with Hosea. She said to herself,
I will go back to my first husband. I was better off then than I am now.
She remembered that it was Hosea who had given her food, wine, and clothes, not the men she had run after, who had given her only a few short seasons before turning her out into the street. The Lord spoke to Hosea again. This time it wasn't a command to punish her. It was a command to go and find her. The Lord said, I will lead her into the desert and speak kindly to her there. Hosea 2:14. Hosea left his fields untended for the first time since she had gone, and he went out to look for her. He walked from town to town, asking people at the gates if they had seen a woman matching her description. At one gate, the guards pointed him toward the next town down the road. In a market in another town, a man selling cloths remembered her and told him which direction she had gone. Finally, after many days of walking and asking, Hosea found her.
Before we continue, these videos take hours and hours to make, so if you could, please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from.
She wasn't the same woman who had left his house with her jewelry catching the light and her eyes on other men. She had been taken in by someone else and was now treated almost like property, kept rather than loved. Hosea stood in the doorway and looked at her. She looked back at him. For a moment, neither of them said anything at all. Hosea didn't walk away. He paid for her freedom, 15 pieces of silver, a measure of barley, and half a measure of barley, and gave it to the man who had her. Then he reached out his hand. She took it. They walked back to his house together, along the same road, past the same fields, the same gates she had once passed through running the other way. She kept her eyes down toward the road the whole way home. When they got home, Hosea didn't go right back to how things used to be. He told her she would have to stay close to him for a while. No other men, and he wouldn't be with other women either. They needed to rebuild what had been broken before they could go back to living as they had before. Gomer agreed. She stayed inside the house, helping with small tasks, sitting near the children, going nowhere without Hosea knowing. Day after day passed, and each day put more distance between her and the life she'd left behind. At first, the house felt strange to both of them, full of long silences at mealtimes. The house that used to be filled with the sound of her walking out the door now had a different feeling. Two people slowly learning to live together again. Hosea took care of her like before, brought her water when she was thirsty, mended the roof before the rains came, and he didn't bring up the past, not once. Some of the most important days of Hosea's life were the quiet ones that came after this, the ones where nothing big happened at all. Gomer worked around the house in the mornings, grinding grain, mending clothes, watching the children. Hosea went out to the fields and came back at night, the same as he always had. One day, several weeks into her return, she walked out to the edge of the field to bring him water, and she found him already stopped there, watching the sunset, just like he used to before she left. She stood next to him without saying a word, and the two of them watched it together. The next evening, she came out again at the same time, and the evening after that. It became part of their routine again, just like the field work used to be. Their children had watched their mother leave before. Now, they watched her stay. They saw their parents standing together at the edge of the field every evening. And slowly, the fear that had filled the house since she left started to fade out of their faces. But neither Hosea nor Gomer realized yet that their story wasn't just about them anymore. What happened in their home was becoming a picture of something much bigger. A picture of how far the whole nation had wandered from God and what it would take to bring them back. Outside their home, the nation kept moving toward trouble. Assyria, a powerful enemy nation to the north, was growing stronger near Israel's borders every year. Israel's kings kept getting overthrown one after another, often by violence. The priests kept leading people to worship statues instead of God. Statues set up in the towns of Bethel and Gilgal, where crowds gathered to bow before them. The people kept breaking their promises to one another and trusting other nations to protect them instead of trusting God. Hosea spoke out against all of this. He stood at the city gates in the early mornings and spoke against the priests and the people doing wrong. He told them God wanted loyalty, not empty rituals carried out at the altars without any change of heart behind them. He told them that just like a husband had gone out into the towns to bring back his wife, God would deal with his people the same way, breaking them down so he could heal them again. Hosea would speak in the city gates all morning and then walk the long road home in the afternoon heat. Gomer would be waiting at the edge of the field when he came into sight, just like she'd started doing since coming back. He'd set down his walking stick at the door, wash the dust from his feet, and they'd eat together while the children told him what had happened that day.
We helped him carry his goods.
You did?
Afterward, Hosea and Gomer would walk back out to that same spot at the edge of the field to watch the sun go down, just like they used to when they were young and just starting out. Years passed this way. Hosea kept living in his house with Gomer by his side. Their children grew older, carrying the weight of the names given to them at birth, but also carrying the memory of a mother who had left and a father who had gone out into strange towns to bring her home. The family that had almost fallen apart was standing strong again, the fields still planted and harvested in their season. Hosea spoke about a day that was still coming, a day he wrote down himself. After this, the people of Israel will turn back. They will look for the Lord their God. Hosea 3:5. He kept telling people this even as Assyria's army kept getting closer every year, and even as Israel's kings kept sending messengers to Egypt asking for help that would never come. At home, the years settled into something calm and steady. Gomer stayed in the home Hosea had brought her back to. The children stayed under their father's roof. And, in time, some of them married and brought their own children to visit. The fields were planted and harvested season after season, the same as they had always been. Every evening, once the work was done, Hosea and Gomer walked out together to that same spot at the edge of the field, the same place they had stood as a young husband and wife. One wrong move, and the king would die. A simple man got the task to protect the king from Absalom. No sword, no army, just his words. To save David, he pretended to be one of Absalom's men. At last, he convincingly fooled him and led Absalom into his own trap. Men were coming to kill the king. That was the plan from the very start. To take David's head, tear the kingdom out of his hands, and leave nothing of his rule behind. And the only thing standing between that plan and the king's death was one quiet servant with no sword and no army at all. His name was Hushai. He was known as the king's friend. It was a title other men spent their whole lives trying to earn. He had no riches and no soldiers under his command. What he had was something harder to take away: the trust of a king. Hushai did not know yet that the ground under the whole kingdom was already cracking, and that soon his job would be to stop a murder before it happened. For weeks, a young man had been standing at the gates of the city every morning. He greeted every person who walked by. He listened to their problems. He told them that if he were judge, things would be fairer. The people began to love him. And far away, in the hills of Hebron, he was quietly gathering men who would call him king in his father's place. His name was Absalom. He was David's own son. The news hit the palace like fire spreading through dry grass. A runner ran in, gasping. Absalom had declared himself king. All of Israel was turning to follow him, and everyone in that palace understood exactly what this meant. Absalom was not coming to share the throne. He was coming to take David's head and rule alone. Absalom was not doing this by himself. Behind him stood a man with one of the sharpest minds in the kingdom, a man David himself used to trust completely. His name was Ahithophel. Without him, the rebellion would have fallen apart in days. With him, the plan to kill David had real strategy behind it, and it was already moving fast. David did not stay to find out how bad things had become. He gathered his family and his servants, and within hours, the king of Israel was walking out of his own city on foot, knowing that somewhere behind him, men were already planning his death. His guards marched with him, their faces grim, their hands never far from their weapons. Hushai walked with him. His clothes were torn. Dust covered his head, a sign of deep sadness. He followed his king up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he climbed, ready to go wherever David went, even into the wild country with nothing. At the top of the mountain, David stopped. Hushai stood in front of him. David looked at him for a long moment. "If you come with me, you will only slow me down."
Hushai, my friend, I need you. I am here, my king. Go to Absalom, be my eyes. I will not fail you.
"If you do that, you can work against Ahithophel's plans for me." Hushai understood right away what David was really asking. He was not being sent away to safety. He was being sent back to stop the very men trying to kill the king, and he would have to do it standing right beside them, smiling, while they planned David's death in front of him. David told him, "Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, are still there. Tell them anything you hear in the palace. Their sons, Ahimaaz and Jonathan, will bring the message to me." Hushai turned around and walked back down the mountain. He was walking away from his king and straight back into the city he had just escaped, back toward the very men who wanted David's head on a spear. While Hushai walked back into the city, David kept moving the other way, deeper into the wild country. On that road, a man ran out from a small village, shouting curses and throwing stones at David, screaming that he was a murderer who deserved to lose everything. At that very same time, on the road into Jerusalem, Hushai walked calmly through the gates, wearing the face of a loyal friend, straight toward the men trying to put David in the ground. Absalom had just entered the city himself. For one moment, Hushai and Ahithophel stood close enough to look at each other. Neither man said a word, but Ahithophel's eyes stayed on Hushai a moment too long, almost as if something told him this man was not as loyal as he claimed to be. Hushai called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" Absalom turned and looked at him. He did not smile. His eyes moved slowly over Hushai's torn clothes, his dusty head. Guards stood close by, ready to strike at the wrong answer. "Is this your loyalty to your friend?" Absalom asked. "Why didn't you go with David?" No one moved. For a moment, everything hung on what Hushai would say next. If Absalom did not believe him, there would be no second chance. Hushai did not look away. "No," he said. "Whoever the Lord and the people of Israel have chosen, I will follow. I served your father. Now I will serve you." Absalom studied him a little longer. Then he believed him. Hushai was welcome to Absalom's inner circle, given a seat among the men deciding the future of the kingdom, while his true loyalty stayed with the king they were trying to destroy. Every day after that, he sat in rooms where other men spoke openly about ending David's life, and every day he had to nod along as if he wanted the same thing they did. Soon, the most dangerous night of Hushai's life began. This was the night the rebellion would decide exactly how David was going to die. Ahithophel stood before Absalom with a plan already in his mind. "Give me 12,000 men," he said. "I will go out tonight after David. I will catch him while he is tired and afraid, and everyone with him will run. I will kill the king myself, alone, and bring everyone else back to you. It was a plan built entirely around one single goal: David's death, that very night, before he had any chance to prepare a defense. The plan pleased Absalom right away. It pleased every man in the room. It was fast and simple. David, tired and unguarded out in the open country, would have no time to escape it. Then Absalom paused. "Call Hushai too," he said. "Let us hear what he thinks." Hushai walked in, already knowing exactly what this meant. If Ahithophel's plan went forward tonight, David would be dead by morning, and the entire reason David had sent him back into this city would die with him. Absalom asked him plainly, "Should we do as he says? If not, speak." Hushai chose his next words carefully, because the king's life now depended entirely on what he said in the next few seconds. One wrong word, one plan that sounded weaker than Ahithophel's, and Absalom would send his men out that very night with nothing standing in their way. "This time," he said, "Ahithophel's advice is not good." The room went silent. Every eye turned to him. "You know your father and his men," Hushai said, facing Absalom. "They are strong fighters, and right now their hearts are bitter, like a bear that has lost her cubs. Your father is a man of war. He will not be sleeping out in the open, where 12,000 men could easily find him. He has likely already hidden himself somewhere no one would think to look." He let his words sink in before going on. "If your men attack first, and even a few of them fall, word will spread that your army has been beaten. Then even your bravest soldiers will lose their courage. Everyone in Israel knows your father is a fighter, and that his men are brave." Then Hushai offered something else. Not Ahithophel's quick strike in the dark, but something much bigger. Something that would still end with David's death, but in a way far slower, far louder, and far more tempting to a young man who wanted to be remembered as a conqueror. "Gather all of Israel to you, from one end of the land to the other, as many as the sand on the shore. Lead the army yourself. Then we will find David wherever he is and fall on him like dew falling on the ground. Not one man with him will survive, and if he runs into a city, we will bring ropes and pull it down stone by stone." It was a plan that put Absalom at the center of his own story, leading a massive army himself, instead of waiting at home while someone else brought him his father's head. Absalom and everyone in the room agreed at once. "Hushai's advice is better than Ahithophel's," Absalom said. None of them understood what had really just happened. It was not only Hushai's clever words that won the room. It was the Lord working through those words to undo Ahithophel's plan completely, so that the disaster meant for David would fall on Absalom instead. The one night that could have ended with David's head taken in the dark had just slipped away, and no one in that room realized it. Only one man understood exactly what had happened. Ahithophel said nothing. He watched the room praise another man's plan over his own. He stood up, walked out, went home, saddled his donkey, and rode to his own town. There he put his affairs in order. Then he took his own life. Hushai had no time to think about what had happened to him. He was still standing inside a city that would kill him the moment they learned the truth. And the mission was not finished. David was still in danger, and the clock had already started counting down again. He went quickly to find Zadok and Abiathar the priests and told them everything. What Ahithophel had planned and what he had said instead. "Send word to David right now," he told them. "Tell him not to stay the night at the river crossing. He must cross the Jordan, or he and everyone with him will be caught and killed." The priest's sons, Ahimaaz and Jonathan, were waiting just outside the city, careful not to be seen coming or going. A servant girl carried the message to them in secret, slipping out through the back streets where no guard would think to stop her. But a boy spotted them and ran to tell Absalom. The two men did not wait to see what would happen. They ran to a house in a nearby village and climbed down into a well in the yard before anyone could catch sight of them. The woman of the house worked quickly, covering the opening and scattering grain over the top, so nothing looked out of place at all. When Absalom's men came running up the road looking for them, she answered without hesitation, her voice calm. "They were here," she said, "but they crossed the stream already." The men searched the house. They searched the yard. They found nothing. Once the searchers were gone, Ahimaaz and Jonathan climbed out and ran through the night to find David. "Get up," they told him. "Cross the Jordan now." And they told him everything Ahithophel had planned against his life. David did not wait. That same night, he and everyone with him crossed the Jordan River. By sunrise, not one of them remained on the other side, and the plan to catch him in the open country had failed completely. Absalom gathered his army exactly the way Hushai had told him to, as many men as the sand on the shore, and crossed the Jordan after his father, still believing this army would bring him David's death, and the whole kingdom in one stroke. The two armies met in the forest of Ephraim, and there the war that had begun with one single goal, the death of the king, was finally decided. Absalom's men fell before David's soldiers. Absalom himself died there, caught in the branches of a tree as he tried to escape, and the mission that had started with his father's head never reached its end. Far from the battlefield, Hushai heard the news the same quiet way he had done everything else in this story, without a throne, without a sword, without most people ever knowing what he had truly done.
These videos takes hours and hours to make. Please like and subscribe and comment which country you are watching this from. Also, do you want to support the channel? A super thanks helps us create more Bible stories.